This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. While this may look like any other show from us, tonight is special. We've made it to 100 episodes. And if you've made it 99 episodes with us, congratulations. Your 100th episode is on the house. Here's what we got for y'all. As the president-elect prepares to take over, we explore what a Biden presidency would mean for American labor. Plus, a record turnout in this election, but will that trend stick around? We talk to the experts about what 2020's election tells us about future vote trends. But first, here's what you need to know right now. We reached record-breaking numbers of COVID-19 cases in the US this week, and there are few signs of the virus slowing down. With more than 144,000 new daily cases and 65,000 people hospitalized with the virus nationwide, many states are enacting new restrictions in order to bring the virus under control, including curfews and mask mandates.
We know that masks work. They are the easiest, most cost-effective way to limit the spread of COVID-19.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is now warning that if cases continue to rise, the city may decide to close public schools as well. If left unchecked, public health experts estimate as many as 400,000 total deaths in the US by February of 2021. Already, about 1 in every 5 COVID deaths recorded worldwide have come in the US. And while there is news of a promising vaccine on the horizon, widespread distribution may be many months away. So as always, folks, be vigilant about social distancing, stay home when you can, and wear that mask. The Trump team is clinging on to hope that a battle in the courts could upend election results, pointing to the year 2000 drama in Bush v. Gore and the Supreme Court's deciding ruling then.
We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court.
But when you look a little closer, the comparison between 2020 and 2000 doesn't make a lot of sense. Here's why. First off, there's the vote count distance between candidates. In 2000, the first count showed George W. Bush ahead of Al Gore by fewer than 2,000 votes, a margin that triggered an automatic recount by law. This time around, different story. In the disputed states, Biden leads Trump by a relatively large margin, about 20,000 in Wisconsin, 14,000 in Georgia, 11,000 in Arizona, 53,000 in Pennsylvania. Recounts are not likely to seriously change these numbers. And by the way, most of these margins are bigger than what Trump won by in 2016. But in 2000, with a razor-thin margin in just a single state, legal fighting went all the way up to the Supreme Court, which ruled in Bush's favor to actually stop manual recounts.
Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Certainly neither of us wanted it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended. Resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy.
Now, courts have already tossed out some of the Trump campaign's legal challenges, while others are still active. But even if some of these legal challenges were successful, voiding a few hundred votes here or there, it's tough to see how they'd change the election outcome. And if we're going to look back at electoral history, the results of this election are actually shaping up to look a lot less like 2000's close call and a bit more like 2012's Obama win over Mitt Romney, with 3 or 4% and a handful of states separating the candidates. Of course, the fallout from that election decision looked a bit different and, more chill.
We stand for the people of Hong Kong. We fight for democracy in the long run.
Hong Kong's pro-democracy lawmakers have resigned in protest after mainland China removed 4 legislators it deemed a threat to national security. The Hong Kong legislators were disqualified because they refused to acknowledge China's sovereignty over the city, which in the past had held a high level of autonomy from the central government. Pro-democracy lawmakers see this latest move as the end of the one country, two system rule, cementing the growing influence of mainland China in Hong Kong's government. After Hong Kongers held months of anti-government protests earlier this year, Beijing overrode local laws to criminalize political protests, threatening sentences of life imprisonment. President-elect Biden has already outlined what he's focused on in his first term, including labor and strengthening America's workforce. This comes at a time when the American workforce has been hit hard by the pandemic. More than 21 million people are currently receiving jobless benefits. Newsy's Kat Sandoval tells us what labor experts are expecting under a Biden administration.
My fellow Americans.
How will the new administration impact working Americans? We spoke with labor professors to get a sense of how the U.S. workforce could change under President-elect Joe Biden.
The American labor movement was the essential institution to the development of a middle-class economy. And so Biden comes from that time frame. He comes from that era. You'll see President Biden make a stronger commitment, more so than any president that we've seen in decades.
I'm going to be the strongest labor president you have ever had.
Biden was born in a coal town in Pennsylvania and grew up middle class. He has a long history of supporting unions and blue-collar workers, and he's gotten some big endorsements from them, like the AFL-CIO, and they've helped raise millions of dollars in political donations for him. But what Biden can accomplish as president could be limited if Republicans retain the majority in the Senate after the runoff elections in Georgia. Still, labor leaders are seeing this as a union revival.
He has always been very closely tied with labor. He has many friends in labor, and he already has labor people on his transition team and has made a much stronger commitment to labor than any of the previous Democratic candidates that we have seen.
Biden wants to increase the federal minimum wage to $15. Currently at $7.25, it hasn't been increased since 2009. Biden also wants to get rid of tip wages, which pay workers less than minimum wage.
You can't just do that by executive order, and he's going to have a fight on his hands for that.
Another fight for Biden is passing legislation to strengthen workers' right to organize and collectively bargain.
Issues impacting the collective bargaining rights of workers are going to be a high priority and aren't going to be pushed back into the second half of his term.
Many labor advocates say OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has been too lenient on companies, particularly in enforcing COVID safety protocols. Biden plans to enact federal guidelines to protect employees from COVID-19, add stricter penalties for violations, and double the number of OSHA investigators.
By Biden telling the agency to do its job would be a step forward.
Kat Sandoval, Newsy, Chicago.
You know when Super Mario gets that flashy star and just pew? Yeah, we're gonna give that a shot. Our Newsy original series, Next Level, is known for plugging us into the world of video games and how they're reshaping technology and culture. And tonight we're harnessing this series in a new segment we call Next Level Speedrun, starting with this. For your consideration, some very expensive boxes. The next generation of high-powered game consoles, the Xbox Series X from Microsoft and the PlayStation 5 from Sony, are shipping out to retailers and customers this week, and fans are pretty excited about it.
You know what day it is, and if not...
This is a big moment for both of these companies, which are competing to be the device of choice for the next few years of high-end couch gaming. And there's a lot of money at stake. Console games are on track to bring in about $45 billion in revenue in 2020. The previous generation kicked off over 7 years ago with the release of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in 2013. Sony took a commanding lead in that race and has sold an estimated 112 million PlayStation 4s to date since, almost double what Microsoft's Xbox One managed in the same time period. This time around, it's hard to say which console has the edge. Both of the new machines cost around $500 at retail and feature similar technical specs. The hardware means games will load faster, run smoother, and look sharper, particularly on 4K TVs. And game developers can take advantage of that improved power to put out even more realistic looking titles as well. The upgrades won't just apply to new games either. Certain last-gen games will run with enhanced performance on the new boxes.
Making games used to be about these constant trade-offs between the artistic vision and technical limitations. With PS5, we're not going to be burdened like that. We're going to be able to realize our artistic vision a lot better.
If you're not in the market for a $500 device right now, both companies do have slightly cheaper versions of their consoles available. The Xbox Series S and PlayStation 5 Digital for $300 and $400 respectively. The lower price point does come with a drop in specs and the absence of a disk drive. Most modern games already rely on online downloads for bug fixes and extra content, so this switch isn't necessarily a big shift. But it is a sign that the industry is moving further and further away from physical media. It's also a sign that we're getting old. Remember when cartridges were still a thing? For anyone looking to get your hands on either a PS5 or the Xbox sometime soon, good luck. Most online retailers are selling through their initial stock pretty quickly. So anyone without a pre-order is going to have to be quick on the draw to snag a new console. If you want to get any of these new consoles in time for the holidays, it might be worth setting up some alerts now to catch the next wave of shipments. Just whatever you do, stay off Craigslist. It's not worth the heartache. Although Microsoft and Sony both have new consoles, there's only a handful of new games available to actually play on them at launch. One big marquee title is Spider-Man Miles Morales, a follow-up to 2018's hit web-slinging game. Players step into the Adidas high tops of the danger-defying Miles Morales as he swings around New York City and tries to take on Soul Spider responsibilities in Peter Parker's absence.
You're Spider-Man. You can fix this. Your way.
Other major options include Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which lets you romp around ancient Britain as an axe-wielding Viking, along with a new Call of Duty game, which lets you romp around the Cold War as a trigger-happy CIA agent. Or you could just replay all your old games again on these shiny new machines. We won't judge. And we've got some good news for Hillary Clinton. Voter turnout is up, and so is Pokemon Go's revenue. Nintendo's alternate reality mobile game has reportedly raked in over $1 billion so far this year, per estimates from Sensor Tower. Now, the game's core premise, walk around your neighborhood and snag Pokemon, doesn't work super well during a global pandemic, but a bunch of play from home features added by the developers seem to have paid off and made this the most profitable year for Pokemon Go since the game came out in 2016. Sensor Tower estimates the game has generated about $4 billion over its lifetime. That's almost enough to buy a bike in the original Pokemon. The 2020 election is on course to have the highest voter turnout for the country. Experts say this is due to early voting and mailed-in ballots. So with that in mind, could this affect the way we vote in the future? National reporter Thomas Hoppaugh explores that question.
So I think there are things about this election that certainly, we will be talking about for a very long time. The pandemic first and foremost. How that shaped voting, how that shaped how people engage with politics.
It's no doubt that this election will be one to write about for the history books. When it came to the election and the pandemic, states had to adapt to voting, which meant that several states used early and mail-in voting, something that has caused some controversy in this election.
Trump has been tweeting for several days after the election, all caps with exclamation marks, "Stop the count."
If people were given ballots, given marking devices, with the new election equipment, and they put their ballot in the machine and it didn't read that ballot perfectly, even though the voter did everything that they were supposed to, then that right was violated.
But with the early voting and mail-in ballots, voter turnout is on track to be its highest the country has ever seen. So I spoke with political science expert Patrick Miller on if this could change the way we vote in the future.
Certainly mail voting. Mail voting is nothing new. In 2016, about a quarter of Americans cast a ballot through mail. But many more Americans did in this election. And obviously we're seeing that process play out because you can't count those right away. So that's certainly something that is not new in this election, but unique. And that I think will probably shape the politics of ballot access and turnout, and what states do to restrict or make that easier in years to come. So I think a lot of different things that we'll be dealing with the ramifications of for quite a while.
But Miller says while more people voting should be seen as a good thing, when it comes to political strategy, this is something both parties are going to have to try to navigate through for the next election.
There are political ramifications to high turnout. And I think this election should illustrate for us, high turnout does not necessarily benefit one party or another. In fact, it can be a wash. I think we can look at it and say that high turnout is hopefully good, but people who make policy don't always think that. So we're already starting to see some discussion in certain states about limiting access to mail ballots, perhaps pulling some of those ballot access policies back. And I think in some states that'll be something that we're looking at.
In essence, Miller says this election is already affecting the way we are going to vote in the future. What those routes may be, only time will tell.
That elections are run by the states, administered by the states. And that does create a lot of differences between how states do their elections. Policy is moving in very different directions based on whether you live in a red state or a blue state. And I don't think that anything that happened in this election has really changes that. In fact, I think for both parties in many ways, it may reinforce, I think, really that false supposition that they operate on, that there is political gain or benefit based on how easy or hard you make it to register to vote or to vote itself.
I'm Thomas Hoppo reporting.
Our snack reserves are empty, so now I have to go rifle through people's desks so I won't get hungry up here. We've seen a ton of updates lately related to coronavirus vaccines and treatments to limit the severity of the illness. But it's still going to be a while before vaccines are widely distributed. In the meantime, some people are taking action by addressing a condition linked to higher rates of serious illness from the coronavirus: obesity. Newsy's Lindsay Thies explains.
I'm losing while people are gaining.
37-year-old mom Amanda Kynes Phillips of Cairo, Georgia's weight has changed during the pandemic. For her, being healthy for her kids was a priority.
I'm from the South. We love our Southern comfort food. Give us the fried food, the sweet tea, girl. I mean, I didn't exercise. I just didn't. You get to a point you don't really realize how big you've gotten.
With a family history of weight issues, she opted for a mini gastric bypass surgery from Dr. Michael Snyder, traveling to Denver to get the procedure this summer. This week, she returned for a 4-month follow-up. She's lost 55 pounds.
There's no intolerances or anything like that?
Just the spinach, just the raw spinach.
Dr. Snyder says from Zoom consults to surgeries, his practice, which includes 4 surgeons, is at capacity.
As if we needed another threat to call to action obesity. And taking care of your obesity, this is really a very provocative and important one.
Hospitals have ramped up elective surgeries after pausing for months earlier in the pandemic. Patients like Amanda are causing an increase in bariatric surgeries. Procedures like gastric bypasses, laparoscopic bands, and gastric sleeves restrict stomach size and alter the signals between the stomach and the brain.
The hope is that the weight loss will help them in the fight against COVID.
When you are healthy and you are physically fit, that your immune system is not as compromised.
It's been shown that people do worse with viral infections and infections in general when they're obese. And in addition, the success of a vaccine is limited in people that are obese for any viral vaccine.
1, 2, 3. That's right. Vaccines don't work as well for those who are obese. While we don't have a COVID vaccine yet, take a look at the flu shot, for example. Research from 2017 showed vaccinated obese adults were twice as likely to get the flu.
Obesity is 42+% of Americans, and if you're African American, it's much higher. So it's really an important problem, in terms of our public health of America, and it's not something we can ignore. You happy?
I am.
What's going on?
Just having more energy, not feeling tired all the time.
For Amanda, she's so glad she's made the choice to get her surgery and has some advice for others who might be considering it.
If you're scared, there is absolutely nothing to be scared of. This is your story. This is your life.
Lindsay Thies, Newsy, Denver.
We've previously reported on how a slow transition between presidential administrations, like we're seeing now, could negatively impact national security. The 9/11 Commission report found that a delayed handoff for George W. Bush affected the response to the attacks on September 11th. According to Newsy's Therese Garnier, some are worried that a shakeup at the Pentagon could further harm national security during this transitional period.
On Monday, President Trump fired Defense Secretary Mark Esper. Now, 3 key Pentagon officials with years of experience have handed in their resignations, raising concerns from critics that national security could be in jeopardy.
The president has left the Pentagon without the institutional knowledge and the ability that it should have in any situation. So there's that threat of, is the Pentagon going to be able to function given the number of people who have been removed and the lack of experience that is currently in key positions? It's a concern.
The three defense leaders submitted their resignations one day after President Trump tweeted that Esper had been terminated. And Christopher Miller, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, would be his replacement, quote, effective immediately. James Anderson, acting Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, submitted his resignation Tuesday morning. Joseph Kernan, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, submitted one as well, although his separation had been in the works for months. And Jen Stewart, Chief of Staff to the Defense Secretary, submitted her resignation. They were replaced with people described as loyal to the president, including Anthony Tata, the new acting Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, who has been linked to sharing conspiracy theories in tweets in 2018. In August, Tata had his nomination for a Pentagon position withdrawn due to bipartisan opposition.
Whether you're talking about what Iran is up to, terrorist threats from overseas, there's a lot of things the Pentagon does to try to make sure that they protect us. Looking after the nuclear stockpile, a whole bunch of responsibilities, and the Secretary of Defense is very important.
House Armed Services Committee Chairman Adam Smith says the transition from the Obama administration was a lot smoother than what's happening right now.
A transition team from the incoming Trump administration was led into the building, was given classified information, and met with all of the key agencies and said, okay, what's going on? How do we make the transition? That all was happening by this point. None of it is happening now. The president is refusing to allow the transition team, Joe Biden's transition team, to get that type of information.
Even with all those concerns, Smith says the new acting defense secretary has a decent background, just not as much experience as those who have held the position in the past. Therese Garnier, Newsy, Maryland.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. Don't be shy. We don't bite or anything unless provoked. Next up, a Toy Story. Not the Pixar classic Toy Story, but rather a story about toys. Sorry to disappoint you. This year, the National Toy Hall of Fame, something I didn't know existed until this moment, inducted some classics and one groundbreaking toy that allowed some kids to see themselves reflected in their plaything. Newsy's Casey Mendoza explains.
Every one of the toys in my collection, whether it's new or vintage, it immediately takes me to a point in childhood.
This is my stuffed animal. Her name is Lily.
I was always a stuffed animal kid.
I got her at Build-A-Bear when I was 7.
I still have my original Star Wars action figure case.
I have this in my, in my game closet.
Whether you're a child or a child at heart, toys are an important part of American culture, like baseball or rock and roll. And just like those two industries, toys have their very own Hall of Fame.
It started in 1998 to recognize classic toys that have had enduring impact on American culture.
The Strong National Museum of Play inducts new toys into its National Toy Hall of Fame every year. Its past honorees include popular brands like Barbie, G.I. Joe, and Magic the Gathering, as well as non-branded toys like sticks, balls, or my cat's favorite, cardboard boxes. Toys are chosen by experts and curators for their longevity, icon status, creativity, and innovation. And this year's inductees are Sidewalk Chalk, Jenga, and one of the biggest trailblazers in the toy industry, Baby Nancy.
Baby Nancy of this year's 3 inductees is definitely the least well known, but she was such an important breakthrough in 1968 when she came out as really the first Black baby doll that was modeled on actual Black children, rather than being a mold that was made for white dolls and just with extra coloration.
Baby Nancy broke major ground in 1968 as the very first doll created specifically for black girls. Developed and manufactured by the community-owned company Shindana Toys, the doll was designed with natural hair and ethnically correct facial features. Selling nationwide, Baby Nancy showed the toy industry how much demand there was for representation.
Really starting a trend that we're still not complete with, but representing kids so that they can see themselves in their toys, especially things like dolls and action figures.
Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching, especially for the folks who've been down with us since our maiden voyage. I would give a bunch of shout outs, but I might lose it if somebody start playing me off with music like at an awards show. We'll be back next week for more In the Loop, same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.